The cardboard box was heavier than I remembered, or perhaps it was simply that my arms were tired, a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with weight and everything to do with the 3 years of my life I had just spent carrying a family that didn't seem to notice the strain. I stood on the porch of the house that had stopped being mine the moment the will was read, staring at my brother. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He held the box out to me like it was contaminated, like it was a bundle of old laundry he was eager to be rid of, and he mumbled something about Mom wanting me to have my things. His words were hollow, rattling around in the space between us where a real conversation should have been. He was already stepping back toward the front door, the door that used to be mine too, the door that now belonged to him, along with the furniture, the savings account, and the easy, unburdened life he had always known. I didn't argue. I was too tired to argue. I was too tired to scream, too tired to demand recognition for the nights I spent sleeping on a cot beside her hospital bed, too tired to remind him that while he was building his career in Phoenix, sending emails and liking Facebook updates, I was learning the difference between a pulmonologist and a cardiologist by the fluorescent hum of an ER waiting room. I took the box. I felt the rough cardboard against my palms, the corners digging into my skin, and I walked down the driveway to my truck. I loaded the box into the passenger seat, the only possession I had left from the house that had been my home, and I started the engine. I drove the 40 minutes down Route 9 to the property my mother had left me, the other inheritance, the joke of the estate. It was a worn-down flower shop on the edge of Millhaven, Pennsylvania, a town that felt like it was holding its breath every time the wind blew. The paint on the window trim was peeling in long, curly strips, revealing the gray wood underneath like scabs on a healing wound. The sign out front had lost 2 letters, leaving the name of the shop an unintelligible jumble of consonants that nobody had bothered to fix. The parking lot was a graveyard of gravel and weeds, the crabgrass growing tall through the cracks in the asphalt, claiming the concrete for nature. While my brother got the house, the beautiful, historic house with the wraparound porch and the shade trees, I got a flower shop that hadn't turned a profit since before I graduated high school. A place that smelled of old soil and something vaguely sweet and rotting, a monument to a bygone era. I sat in my truck in that parking lot for a long time. The sun was going down, casting long, thin shadows across the weeded lot, and the engine ticked as it cooled, a rhythmic metallic sound that seemed to mock the silence in my head. A plastic bag drifted across the lot, tumbling in the wind, and caught on the chain-link fence, fluttering there like a flag of surrender. I was 31 years old. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror and saw a stranger. I had spent 3 years changing medication schedules, driving to appointments at all hours, learning the medical jargon that became my second language, sleeping with one ear open every single night in case my mother called out. I had put my own life on hold. I had deferred a job offer in Pittsburgh, a career I had worked years to build. I had watched a relationship I loved fade away, unable to bridge the distance, unable to give him the time he deserved because I was giving everything to her. And when she passed, quietly on a Tuesday morning in March with the rain tapping against the glass, my brother flew in for the funeral. He wore a suit that cost more than my truck, shook hands with relatives he hadn't seen in a decade, and cried in a way that looked practiced, a performance for the audience. 3 days later, he sat across from me in the attorney's office with an expression I can only describe as already decided. He got the house. He got the furniture. He got the savings account. I got the flower shop. She always said you had a green thumb, he told me afterward in the parking lot of the attorney's office, his tone patronizing, as if that single, trite observation explained away the injustice. As if that was supposed to make me feel better about being erased from the family home. Then he smiled, actually smiled, a cold, self-satisfied thing, and said, "I always figured you'd end up doing something like this anyway. Small town, small life." I didn't respond. I couldn't. If I had opened my mouth, the scream that had been building up for 3 years would have torn out of me. So I just got in my car. I drove. And now I was sitting in this cracked parking lot, looking at a building that smelled like dust and disappointment, and I thought, this is what 3 years of my life bought me. This is the reward for sacrificing my youth, my career, my love. I almost drove away. I want you to know that. I seriously considered putting the truck in reverse, backing out onto Route 9 and driving to Pittsburgh. I could have disappeared. I could have started over somewhere anonymous, Somewhere no one knew me as the daughter who stayed, the daughter who gave up everything, the daughter who apparently got what she deserved. But it was getting dark, and the exhaustion had settled into my bones like heavy lead, and I had nowhere else to go that night. So I got out. The front door stuck when I tried to open it. The wood had swollen with the humidity of the Pennsylvania spring. I had to lean into it with my shoulder, ramming my body against the frame, which felt appropriate given the state of my life. It gave way with a groan, and I stumbled inside. The air was dense and stale, heavy with the scent of dried flora and neglect. Someone had left a half-empty bag of perlite open on the counter years ago, and it had gone damp, clumping together into a solid mass of white granules. The refrigerated display case along the far wall had been turned off for who knows how long. I could tell by the oppressive silence, and there was a faint smell of something that had been flowers a week ago and was now just organic matter returning to the earth, a sweet, cloying rot. I found the light switch, a plastic toggle that felt greasy under my thumb. I flicked it up. One of the two overhead fluorescents flickered on, buzzing with a low, headache-inducing hum. The other one remained dead, its glass coated in a layer of gray grime. I stood in the middle of the shop and looked around at what my mother had left me. There were dried flowers hanging from hooks along the ceiling, lavender mostly, some eucalyptus, some statusy in pale purple and white. They had been there long enough to gather a fine layer of dust, but they were still intact, still holding their shape, preserved in a state of suspended animation. There was a wooden work table scarred with years of cuts and soil stains. The surface darkened by age and use. There were shelves of ceramic pots, some cracked, some intact, arranged with what had once been care, now just gathering dust. On the wall behind the register, my mother, I realized with a jolt, had pinned a small card. It was yellowed, the edges curling, but the handwriting was unmistakable. It was hers. It said, "The right hands will know what to do." I stared at that card for a long time. My mother had written it. She had pinned it there in her own shop in her own handwriting, and she had left this place to me. I didn't know what to do with that yet. I was still too raw, still too close to the funeral and the attorney's office and my brother's smile. The words felt like a riddle I didn't have the energy to solve. So I pushed the thought aside. I found a folding cot in the back storage room. My mother had apparently used it when she worked late during the holidays, a relic of her own solitude. I unfolded it, the metal legs screeching against the concrete floor, and I lay down on it, still wearing my coat. I stared at the water-stained ceiling tiles, counting the stains until my vision blurred, and I fell asleep to the smell of dried lavender and old soil, the ghost of my mother's presence surrounding me. I woke up at 5:30 because the refrigerated case clicked on automatically, the loud mechanical clunk startling me out of a dreamless sleep. I sat up, disoriented, my neck stiff from the cot, and for a moment I didn't know where I was. The gray light of dawn was filtering through the grime on the windows. Then reality rushed back in. The attorney's office, the house, the brother, the shop. I made myself get up. I made myself move because staying still meant feeling, and feeling was too dangerous. There was a utility sink in the back room, and I washed my face with freezing cold water, gasping at the shock of it, and dried it with a rough brown paper towel from a roll on the shelf. I found a coffee maker in the corner, a dusty old Mr. Coffee, and I managed to scrounge up some filters and grounds from a cupboard. I filled it with water from the sink and stood waiting for it to brew, the smell of coffee slowly cutting through the musty air, and looked around the back room properly for the first time. It was smaller than the front of the shop, divided by metal shelving into a work area and a storage area. There were bags of potting mix stacked like sandbags, boxes of floral wire, rolls of ribbon in a dozen colors that had faded with time, and boxes of cellophane wrap crinkling in the silence. There were labeled bins along one wall, sympathy arrangements, wedding materials, seasonal, organized, and deliberate, a testament to my mother's mind. She had been a systematic woman. Everything had a place, which was why the corner bothered me. In the far left corner of the storage room, behind a shelving unit that had clearly been moved recently, you could see the drag marks in the thick dust on the floor. There was a door I hadn't noticed the night before. It was built into the wall, low and narrow, painted the same beige as everything else, almost invisible if you weren't looking for it. There was no handle, just a small brass latch, the old kind that folds flat against the wood. I stood in front of it with my steaming cup of coffee, the warmth seeping into my cold hands, and I thought about whether I wanted to know what was behind it. My heart was hammering a strange, frantic rhythm against my ribs. A part of me wanted to turn around, walk out the front door, and never look back. But the other part, the part that had spent 3 years solving puzzles and navigating crises, needed to see. I reached out and undid the latch. It was stiff, but it gave way with a sharp click. I pulled the door open. It wasn't a closet, it was a staircase. Narrow wooden steps, 6 of them leading down into darkness, descending into a basement that should not have existed. I had looked up the property records when my mother first mentioned the shop to me years ago, more out of idle curiosity than anything else, and there had been no basement listed. No below-grade space. Just the footprint of the shop and the storage room. But here were 6 steps, and at the bottom of them a room. I went down slowly, one hand trailing along the rough stone wall, the air growing cooler with every step. The light from the storage room reached only partway down the stairs, leaving the bottom in shadow. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, moving across the floor, concrete, swept clean, and then across the walls, and I stopped moving entirely. My breath hitched in my throat. The room was full. Not with junk, not with the kind of basement accumulation that gathers when nobody is paying attention. It was organized, deliberate, meticulous. There were metal shelves along 3 walls, industrial strength, and on them were records, binders, ledgers, file boxes labeled by year, going back 30 years. A history of the shop I had never seen. In the corner stood a fireproof safe, small but solid, a combination lock glinting in the flashlight beam. There was a folding table set up in the center of the room with a lamp on it. Battery-powered, I realized, when I found the switch and it clicked on, bathing the room in a soft, yellow light. And on the table, centered perfectly, was a single manila envelope. My name was written on it, in my mother's handwriting. I sat down on the cold concrete floor because my legs suddenly didn't feel reliable enough to hold me up. The concrete was chilling, seeping through my jeans, but I barely felt it. I looked at the envelope for a long time before I touched it. My name, her handwriting. In a room that wasn't supposed to exist, beneath a shop everyone had treated like a consolation prize. I picked it up. It wasn't sealed, just the metal clasp bent closed to keep it shut. My fingers were trembling as I opened it. Inside were 2 things. A letter, handwritten, 7 pages long, the pages crisp and smelling faintly of her perfume, and a business card for an attorney I had never heard of. Not the attorney who had handled the estate, a different one entirely. A man named Mr. Aucaffer. I read the letter. I'm not going to tell you everything my mother wrote. Some of it was private, the kind of thing that belongs only to the person it was written to, a final confession of a mother to her daughter. But I will tell you what mattered. She had started this business when I was 4 years old. Not because she needed the income. My father's life insurance had covered the house, left us comfortable. She had started it because she needed something that was hers. Something she had built from the ground up, something that couldn't be taken away by a death or a downturn. She had run it for 27 years, through the slow seasons and the good ones. Through my father's death and my brother's adolescence and my own growing up. She had run it through the years when flower shops were dying because people ordered online, and the years when she adapted and found ways to survive, pivoting when she had to, reinventing when she must. She had built something real, and she had watched both of her children grow into adults. She had watched carefully. She said that in the letter. I have watched carefully for a long time, and I know what I know. She knew my brother was not careless because he was inherently cruel. He was careless because he had never had to be anything else. She had made it easy for him, and she knew that, and she said it plainly. She had given him things all his life because it was easier than requiring something of him, and she had watched him become someone who expected things without earning them. And she said she was sorry. She was sorry she hadn't required more of him when it mattered, sorry she had let him become soft. She knew I had come home. She knew what it had cost me. She wrote, and this is the part where I had to stop reading for a while, tears blurring the ink on the page, that she had watched me set down my own life, piece by piece, without being asked, without complaint. She said she had never once taken that for granted, even when it looked like she had. The shop was not the consolation prize. The shop was what she had built. It was her life's work. And she had left it to me because she believed. I remember she underlined this word twice. She believed I was the one who understood that something worth having requires something of you. The shop had value, not just sentimental value, but real, tangible value. She had spent the last several years quietly, systematically building what she called the other side of the business. The ledgers in this room documented it all. Wholesale contracts with 3 regional grocers, a long-term arrangement with a hotel chain, a licensing agreement for a proprietary dried floral arrangement line sold through a home goods retailer I had definitely heard of, a brand I had seen in malls. She had not told anyone about this, not my brother, not the neighbors. She had built it in the margins, carefully, the way she did everything, hiding the profit to protect it, to ensure it went to the person who had earned it. And then she had put it in this room and left a letter that told me exactly where to look and who to call. The attorney on the business card, Mr. Ackhaffer, was handling a separate trust. Not the estate that had already been settled with the other lawyer, the one my brother had controlled. A business trust, structured years ago, that transferred to me upon her death and upon my taking possession of the property. My brother's name was not on it. He had never known it existed. My mother had known what she was doing. She had known the whole time. She had protected the future of her legacy from the son she knew would squander it, and entrusted it to the daughter who had proven she would nurture it. I sat on that cold floor for 2 hours. I read the letter twice more. I looked at the ledgers. I looked at the numbers, real numbers, documented numbers, the kind that meant something. I sat with all of it, the silence of the basement pressing in around me. I thought about my brother. I thought about him standing in the attorney's parking lot smiling, saying small town, small life, the arrogance radiating off him like heat. I thought about the 3 years I'd spent waking up at night, driving to pharmacies at midnight, sitting in hospital waiting rooms under fluorescent lights reading old magazines until my eyes burned. I thought about the job I didn't take, the relationship I watched fade from a distance, the version of my life I had folded up and set aside like something I'd come back to later. And I thought about my mother, down here alone, building something, keeping it safe, waiting to hand it to the right person. I called the attorney when the office opened at 9:00. His name was Mr. Ackhaffer, and his voice was deep and steady. He was matter-of-fact and professional and clearly unsurprised to hear from me. He said my mother had been clear in her instructions and thorough in her documentation. He said the trust transfer was straightforward. He said we should schedule a meeting as soon as I was ready. I told him I was ready now. I drove to his office with the letter and the business card clutched in my hand like a lifeline. I sat across from him at a clean, mahogany desk, and he explained systematically what my mother had built. The wholesale contracts alone were generating enough annual revenue that the shop, if I wanted to continue operating it, would not need to turn a profit from retail sales for years. The retail side was actually the smaller part, the window dressing. The licensing agreement had 4 years left on its initial term with renewal options that would double the payout. The hotel chain contract had just been renewed for 5 years. He slid a document across the desk, a valuation summary, and I looked at the number at the bottom of it. I looked at it for a long time. It was not a small number. It was more than the house. It was more than the savings account my brother had emptied into his own pocket. My mother had left me something extraordinary. She had built it quietly, carefully, over years, and she had wrapped it in the thing that looked least impressive from the outside, and she had waited. I drove back to the shop afterward and sat in the parking lot again, the same cracked lot where I had sat 2 nights before, certain I had been left with nothing. I looked at the peeling paint on the window trim. I looked at the sign missing 2 letters. I thought, she did this on purpose. She kept it looking like nothing because she knew exactly who would look at it and what they would see. My brother saw a dump. I saw a kingdom in disguise. My brother called that evening. He was in good spirits, had already spoken to a realtor about listing the house, already thinking about what to do with the savings. A new car, maybe a vacation. He asked how I was settling in with the shop, the way you'd ask someone how they're settling in with a disappointment. It's a lot to take in, I said, which was the truest thing I had said to him in years. I'm sure you'll figure it out, he said breezily. You always landed on your feet, even if it took a while. I didn't tell him, not that night. I spent the next 2 weeks going through every binder in that basement room. I learned my mother's business the way you learn a language from someone who is no longer there to teach you, slowly from context, from the evidence of their choices. I called the grocery contacts. I called the hotel chain account manager. I introduced myself as the new owner, my mother's daughter, and in every conversation I heard something shift, a small warmth, a recognition. They said they had heard about me. She had told them about me. She had told them in her careful way that her daughter would be taking over, that her daughter was someone you could trust to follow through. I wasn't just inheriting money. I was inheriting a reputation of excellence I didn't even know she had cultivated for me. I repainted the window trim on a Saturday in late April. I fixed the sign, replacing the missing letters so the name bloomed again against the wood. I turned the refrigerated case back on, the hum now sounding like a heartbeat, and ordered new stock. I opened the shop on a Monday morning with clean windows and the smell of fresh eucalyptus in the air. My brother came to town in May. He was driving through, or said he was, and stopped at the shop. I saw his rental car pull up and felt a calm settle over me, the kind of calm that comes from knowing you hold all the cards. He walked in and looked around with the same slightly pitying expression he'd worn in the attorney's parking lot months ago. He asked how business was. He asked if I was covering my costs. I said I was doing fine. He looked at the flowers, the pots, the dried lavender still hanging from the ceiling. He said, "Mom really did just love this little place, didn't she?" The way you talk about something small and harmless and inconsequential, like a stray cat or a child's drawing. I said, "She built something real here." He smiled the way he did when he thought I was being sentimental, a little sad, a little condescending. "Sure. Listen, I was thinking, if you ever want to sell the property, I might know someone who'd be interested. Get you some real money out of it. A fresh start." I looked at my brother. I really looked at him. I thought about the letter. I thought about what my mother had written about him, not with anger, but with a brutal honesty. She wrote that she loved him, and that she had failed him in specific ways she regretted, and that she hoped the grace of getting less than he expected might teach him something she hadn't been able to. She hoped the struggle might make him a man, finally. "I'm not selling," I said softly. "I get it," he said, patting the counter. "Sentimental value, it's hard to let go." "Not sentimental," I said, my voice steady. "It's a good business, a very good business. I'm going to grow it." He laughed a little, the way you do when something strikes you as gently naive. He didn't believe me. He couldn't. His worldview didn't allow for me to be the victor. It required me to be the runner-up, the consolation prize. I didn't explain. I didn't show him the ledgers or mention the trust or say the number I had looked at across Mr. Ockhaffer's desk. My mother hadn't required me to. She had left me the choice. She had given me the power of the secret. He left after 20 minutes, promising to come back for Christmas, though we both knew he probably wouldn't. I watched his rental car pull out of the lot and onto Route 9, kicking up dust as it accelerated away from the small life he despised. And I stood in the doorway of my shop in the May sunlight, the air sweet with the scent of the hydrangeas I had arranged that morning. I thought about what my mother had written on the card on the wall. "The right hands will know what to do." She had written that and pinned it where she would see it every day, a reminder to herself, a promise to the future. I didn't know if she had written it for me or for herself or for both of us. But as I looked around the shop, at the shelves, the counter, the door to the basement that held the keys to my freedom, I knew she had been right. I went back inside. I had an arrangement to finish, a standing order for the hotel due Thursday, 40 centerpieces in white and pale green, and the work table was waiting, scarred and solid, the way it had always been. I put on the playlist my mother used to play in here, a mix of 70s folk and soft rock that I found labeled Shop on her old phone, which I'd set up in the dock on the shelf. The music filled the room, chasing away the last ghosts of the stale air. I started working. My hands knew what to do. They had always known. I had just needed to find the room where everything was kept, go down the stairs, turn on the light, and see what had been waiting there all along. Some things are not built to be seen from the outside. Some things are built from the inside out slowly over years by someone who knows exactly which pair of hands they're building it for. My mother had known. She had left her instructions in the handwriting I'd known all my life, in a room that wasn't on any map, beneath a shop that looked like a consolation prize. I worked until 7:00 that evening, the 40 centerpieces done and wrapped, stacked carefully by the door for the morning pickup. I washed my hands in the utility sink, watching the dirt and the chlorophyll spiral down the drain, and dried them on a clean towel. I turned off the lights, both of them working now, the second bulb replaced, bathing the room in darkness, and locked the front door. In the parking lot, the weeds between the gravel were starting to come back. I made a mental note to pull them on the weekend. It was my lot now, my weeds, my kingdom. I drove home to the small apartment I'd rented 2 miles away. Nothing much, but it was mine. I drove with the windows down and the spring air coming through, carrying the scent of the countryside, and I thought about what I was going to build. I thought about the expansion contracts I was drafting with Mr. Aucaffer. I thought about the future my mother had bought for me with her silence. I thought my mother would have liked to know. But looking at the road ahead, stretching out under the headlights, I think she already did. The revenge wasn't that I was rich and he wasn't. The revenge was that I was seen, truly seen, by the one person who mattered while he was still a stranger to her. And that was enough.